The U.S.-Mexico border is considered the most heavily militarized border in the world. It stretches 130 miles, cutting through deserts, rivers, and mountain ranges. The United States has spent over $15 billion turning 700 miles of it into a 30-foot-tall steel wall, what Donald Trump once called the impenetrable wall. Yet, within just a few years, more than 3,000 holes appeared along the border, dozens of tunnels were discovered, and over 2 million people still tried to cross every year. Then suddenly, in 2025, the number of crossings dropped by 30%. It wasn't because the steel got thicker. It wasn't because of new surveillance technology. It was because Mexico did something no one expected, and they didn't spend a single cent. So what did Mexico do? Let's begin right now. To understand today's story, we have to go back to the early 1990s. At that time, President Bill Clinton launched Operation Gatekeeper, building the first fences along San Diego and El Paso with the goal of protecting national security and controlling illegal immigration. Later, Barack Obama expanded the fencing in the California-Mexico area, but no one pushed the project further than Donald Trump. He said he was very proud of it, and it's easy to see why. The wall along the Mexican border was the centerpiece of Trump's 2016 campaign, and he turned it into a physical symbol of his presidency. From 2017 to 2021, he poured $15 billion into building more than 450 miles of 30-foot-tall steel walls equipped with sensors, radars, surveillance balloons, and high-powered floodlights, a 21st-century wall combining steel and technology. The goal was clear: stop illegal migration, control drug smuggling, and restore the image of an America that was stronger by closing its doors. But while the U.S. was busy building walls, Mexico was quietly building a strategy. In June 2019, Trump announced he would impose a 5% tariff on all Mexican goods if they didn't stop the flow of migrants. It was just a threat, but enough to shake 80% of Mexico's exports, worth nearly $400 billion a year. Within 10 days, Foreign Minister Marcelo Ebrard flew to Washington, negotiated overnight, and signed an emergency agreement. 6,000 National Guard troops were immediately deployed to Mexico's southern border with Guatemala to block Central American migrant caravans. In exchange, Trump suspended the tariffs, and Mexico kept its access to the U.S. market. A country that didn't build a wall had suddenly become the living wall of another nation. That's how the Remain in Mexico program was born. The U.S. sent asylum seekers back to Mexico to wait for their cases to be processed. Between 2019 and 2022, more than 70,000 people were returned. Cities like Tijuana, Ciudad Juarez, and Matamoros turned into massive temporary refugee camps. And here's the fascinating part: the stranded migrants gave rise to a gray economy worth tens of millions of dollars every month. Hotels sprang up everywhere, restaurants tripled their prices, locals opened transport services, job placement agencies, even cartels started charging crossing fees of about $500 per person. They called it the migrants' economy. Tijuana had never been so bustling, and because of that economic boom, many local governments didn't actually want the wall to be finished. In reality, even after this massive steel wall was declared complete, a wave of problems immediately followed. Picture this: a 29-foot-tall strip of solid steel weighing hundreds of thousands of tons, painted glossy black to absorb heat, stretching endlessly across the desert horizon. When it was inaugurated, American media hailed it as the 21st-century technological wall equipped with radar sensors, surveillance balloons, infrared cameras, and floodlights that made the night as bright as a stadium. Trump even visited the site himself, placed his hand on the scorching metal, and boldly declared, "No one can climb over it. No one can get through it. And if they touch it, they'll burn their hands." Contractors boasted that each post was custom cast, reinforced with concrete, resistant to cutting, digging, and climbing, as if nothing could defeat it. But reality turned out colder than steel. With just a $20 angle grinder sold at almost any hardware store near the border, Mexican smuggling gangs could slice through the 30-foot steel wall in 15 to 20 minutes, faster than it takes to brew a cup of Starbucks coffee. Sparks flew into the desert night, muffled by a wet blanket to avoid radar detection. When the steel bar fell, it left a hole just big enough for a person to crawl through. Once discovered, maintenance crews were immediately dispatched to weld it back together. But the next night, the smugglers returned, cutting the exact same spot. Because the welded metal was now softer than the original steel, it was even easier to break. According to internal reports from U.S. Customs, between 2019 and 2022, cartels breached the wall 272 times. In the El Centro sector alone, there were 867 incidents, while San Diego recorded 866. Every year, the U.S. spends an additional $2.6 million just to patch these holes, while the cartels spend around $500 per cut. On one 25-mile stretch, agents documented 71 welded repair spots, which from a distance looked like a series of scars running across the body of the massive steel wall. As one observer joked, this wall isn't a barrier anymore, it's an abstract art piece patched together everywhere. But you know on the map it stretches like a scar, 930 miles long. Yet in reality, it's just a chain of broken fragments, parts where there's a wall and parts where there's nothing but desert and dry brush. Hundreds of construction sites were abandoned when administrations changed. If you open Google Maps, you can see the bizarre sight yourself. The steel wall suddenly stops in the middle of the desert, right where another fence was supposed to begin. There, the wind buries the foundations and sand construction. Debris lies scattered, and through gaps as narrow as 3 feet or as wide as 30 migrants quietly walk through, as if the wall never existed. In Texas, things are even stranger. To patch the gaps along the Rio Grande River, the state government built a 984-foot floating barrier made of giant orange buoys linked together. But just weeks later, a U.S. federal court ordered its removal, ruling that it violated international waterway laws. Mexico protested fiercely, calling it a deadly barrier after 2 migrants were found tangled in the razor wire wrapped around the buoys. While the U.S. struggled to seal its northern side of the border, Mexico quietly reinforced its southern frontier with Guatemala, turning itself into a double border, blocking Central Americans from entering below and holding back those the U.S. sent back above. Across Arizona, many sections of the wall were sloppily welded, bent, uneven, and rusting under the desert sun. Some stretches were hastily built just before the Biden administration took office, leaving behind a scarred landscape of patchwork fences that looked more like farm gates than a national defense wall. Mexican smugglers grew smarter and more cunning. They gradually chose a different route, going underground. And that's the scariest part. From 2017 to 2019, U.S. border agents found 40 secret tunnels. By 2020, the average pace was 1 new tunnel a month. You heard that right beneath the impenetrable wall lies an underground maze stretching for miles, linking the two countries like the dark blood vessels of the underworld. The most famous is the Tijuana-San Diego Tunnel, about 8 miles long and more than 65 feet deep, complete with rails, elevators, ventilation, high-voltage power lines, and even fluorescent lights running along the walls like a tiny subway line. One U.S. official joked if they added a few cars, they could sell tickets for underground tours. Cartels poured millions of dollars into building these tunnels, and what chills people most is that they never reused the same passage. Whenever one tunnel was discovered, they'd seal it with concrete and dig a new one just a few hundred meters away. In Otay Mesa, California, police once uncovered an ordinary warehouse with a tunnel beneath that was as deep as a 6-story building. The entrance was hidden under a concrete floor carpeted over with a pool table sitting on top. Another tunnel ran straight into an import-export company in an industrial park only half a mile from the border. Many tunnels even had drainage pumps, fiber optic cables, and hydraulic trapdoors. It sounds like a Hollywood movie, right? But this is real life, and the director is the cartel. When people talk about the border wall, few realize that it doesn't just divide people, it also splits the natural world in half. In the Sonoran Desert, where jaguars, pronghorn antelopes, and Mexican gray wolves once roamed freely, there now stand endless rows of cold steel posts. American ecologists call it the death line for wildlife. According to research by the Center for Biological Diversity, over 90% of natural migration corridors for large animals in Arizona have been cut off. One infrared camera even captured a male jaguar pacing back and forth in front of the wall before vanishing, and it was never seen again. Farther south, the Tohono O'odham indigenous communities lost access to their ancestral lands and water sources as the wall blocked dry riverbeds that once connected their territories. In some areas, the wall altered rainfall drainage, causing flooding along the borderlands and toppling centuries-old saguaro cacti, some over 200 years old. You might think, can a few hundred steel beams really affect an entire ecosystem? But imagine building a Great Wall of China through a national wildlife reserve. That's exactly what the U.S.-Mexico border wall has become. During migration season, even birds and bats crash into the bright floodlit towers, drawn in like moths to a wall of light. You might think the story ends there, but not quite. Did you really believe the Mexican cartels would stop when both the ground and underground were no longer enough? The next frontier was the sky. Yes, you heard that right. Of course, they can't fly like birds, but they can use drones. Ordinary consumer drones, no bigger than a table fan, costing just a few $100s, can fly 5 to 10 kilometers and carry up to 15 kilograms of contraband. Every week, it's estimated that hundreds of these drones quietly cross the border, buzzing through the night like swarms of mechanical bees. The story began in 2015 when a DJI Spreading Wings S900 drone crashed in a parking lot in Tijuana carrying $43,000 worth of drugs. The incident shocked U.S. authorities. It turned out that right above the border, there existed an invisible air fleet that neither radar nor cameras had detected. Cheap but incredibly efficient, these drones became so reliable that the cartels nicknamed them "steel mules," replacing traditional drug couriers. It may sound small-scale, but what's unfolding is an undeclared technological war. The U.S. responded with AI detection systems, anti-drone radar, and RF signal monitors, yet ran into a frustrating legal wall. Federal law prohibits signal jamming or hijacking drones because it could interfere with GPS signals used by commercial aircraft and emergency services. And so, in the middle of the 21st century, the world's greatest superpower found itself powerless against a fleet of cheap machines made in China. After the battles on the ground, underground, and in the sky, the United States still refused to give up. Instead, it doubled down trying to make the wall smarter. If once the border wall was made of steel and concrete, it's now being rebuilt with cameras, sensors, and artificial intelligence. The U.S. has deployed a wave of new systems, ground-penetrating radar to detect tunnels more than 65 feet deep, seismic and infrared sensors buried across the Arizona desert that can detect footsteps from hundreds of feet away, and AI surveillance networks that analyze movement in real time, distinguishing between humans, animals, and vehicles. All of these systems link to aerial surveillance balloons, the eyes in the sky streaming live footage 24/7 to the main control center in El Paso. But Mexico is no longer the passive player. The Mexican government is now countering with what experts call soft technology. It has built a national highway camera network, tracked migrants' phone SIM cards, and worked with telecom providers to map border crossing routes based on mobile signal data. In hotspots like Sonora and Chiapas, smart license plate cameras are installed densely, and their data is shared directly with U.S. security agencies through the Merida Initiative, a $3.6 billion security aid program. Today, the U.S.-Mexico border is just one piece of a much larger picture, a world of walls. Have you noticed? Across the planet, humanity keeps building higher, colder barriers, not only made of steel, but also of technology, politics, and fear. In the Middle East, Israel has built a 700-kilometer wall separating the West Bank, a maze of concrete and motion sensors that forces millions of Palestinians to live in the shadow of a barrier every single day. In South Asia, India has erected a 200-kilometer barbed wire fence along its border with Bangladesh, lined with floodlights that shine through the night and armed guards stationed 24/7, longer than the Great Wall of China itself. In Europe, Hungary built a 13-foot-high wire fence to block refugees from Serbia. And in North Africa, Morocco sealed off Western Sahara, turning the desert into an invisible zone where no one is allowed to cross. All of these walls share the same justification: national security. But the more walls go up, the less secure, the more divided the world seems to become. And among all these lines on the global map, the U.S.-Mexico border remains the most expensive, the longest, and the most complex, a place where steel, artificial intelligence, and human will collide every single day. And now, as the world once again turns its eyes south, the U.S.-Mexico border has returned to the spotlight. Donald Trump is back in the White House with a renewed promise to finish the Great Wall he once left unfinished. Meanwhile, Mexico, after years of being treated as America's human barrier, is tightening its border control like never before. How high must a wall be before people stop seeking a way to live? Or are we building a wall that shuts off our own conscience? If you've made it to the end of this story, perhaps you felt it too. The border doesn't just lie between two countries, it lies between hope and despair. Tell us what you think: is Mexico the shield or the victim? And don't forget to subscribe, because what's happening at the border today could become the world's next wall tomorrow.